Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Ankh session. Ankh is a raw black. We're going to have fun talking about raw black today. By the end of this session, you'll know much more about raw black in general, and you'll know why I chose the name Ankh, and you'll know a lot more about the Jing Mai Mountains, where Ankh is grown and processed. So that's what the focus of today's session is going to be. Let's do a little tea shop news at the beginning, as we normally do. And let's talk about some great things which happened this week. So the first great thing, of course, is that we have all of our orders in China. Last of the orders for this year, as far as we know. Everything is moving. And we believe that our order, and this is for the Cliff Teas, is sitting in Shanghai waiting to be processed. So we're very excited about that. We have a fabulous new lineup of teas overall. And as we matured in this location, as we matured within the tea industry, as we've continued to build these relationships, we get access to more and more interesting and different things. Now, all of you are probably wondering the following thing, because you're thinking, well, gosh, John, you get on these broadcasts and you say more and more interesting things, and yet we don't see more and more interesting things yet. When are we going to start to be exposed to these more interesting things? I'm glad you asked that question, because actually, lo and behold, on this board, 4 new items under the reds. Is that all we have up? No, as a matter of fact, we're getting some greens up also. So over this next week, actually, you're going to see more and more new, interesting teas for which you will be absolutely surprised at the backstories of these teas. Just amazing opportunities this year. All right, so let's move from the amazing future into the amazing present. And let's talk about Ankh. So again, I'm going to shortcut the questions because I know people are going to ask me, well, wait a minute. Were you watching The Mummy when you named this? Did you see Lon Chaney come on and that inspired you to choose this name? The answer would be no. Ankh has many, many symbolic meanings and a symbolic significance of life, because you know, or if you know Egyptology or Egyptian culture, for the dead kings, they used to put that symbol on their lips, and it was supposed to link them with life, continued life, even after they passed away. It's a symbol of balance. It's a symbol of fertility. It's really abundance and growth. Ankh, and you'll understand this by the time we finish this session, really is a good name for this tea because it does have a certain type of balance. I'm not going to give away what that balance is. You're going to tell me what that balance is as you taste it. But hence, that's why I went out in that direction. Not the usual direction I go, but there's a reason for that. All right, raw black in general. So for those of you who are new on the broadcast, remembering, of course, black tea as a category means fermented. Oh, but wait a minute, raw black. Are we out in the savannah hunting? things? No. The raw black indicates that it is beginning the journey of fermentation versus a fully processed black. So last week, remember we had Heavenly Arrow. So Heavenly Arrow was already processed, and therefore fermentation process was well on its way. Raw blacks, it's somewhere at the start, and if it's at the very start, the tea leaves, the tea flavor will resemble a green tea. The longer it goes, the more interesting the flavor will become. So let's put some dates and let's put some timings around Ankh. Was Ankh just picked this last spring? And the answer would be no. Ankh was picked 10 years ago. And so it's been in this slow motion process of fermentation for 10 years. And it's a loose leaf pick. It's not compressed in the cake. And we got this when it was 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old. And we got it to show customers what a 6 or 7 year old raw black loose leaf would be. And now it's aged out to 10 years old. And so remember that as you're tasting it today, because every year the taste profile changes. And why wouldn't? Because you have a couple things going on. Fermentation primarily at the beginning, but then after year 5, 6, or 7, you have oxidation occurring at a faster pace and fermentation slowing down. So really, with raw blacks, in the beginning, you have two processes driving flavor change. Fermentation, just like the hair. I'm talking about the hair of the tortoise and the hair. It races ahead. It is the prominent driver of flavor and aroma change in the beginning. And remembering that it's an agent of change, it's a microbial agent of change. So what do I mean? A yeast, a fungi, a mold, and all of those, and bacteria. All of those things can be acting together, and they change over time. So the question may come to your mind, okay, so you have some combination of microbial material changing the tea leaf. And how is that determined? Is that just a luck of the draw, or does the farmer or the producer go out in the field and lovingly and caringly collect these microbial agents and sprinkle them on the tea leaves and then start the process? Well, that would be an amazing trick if the farmer or producer could really do that. Remember, you and I normally can only see the effects of microbial agents. Minus a microscope, our eyes just aren't good enough to pick that up. But we can certainly see the effects. We can smell the effects. So that's one agency that's occurring to the tea leaves. And remember, to answer this question fully, how are these agents accumulating and how are they starting? So we'll talk about the whole process in a minute, but let me answer that question directly. And we'll skip to the last step of raw black, which is to take it outside and let it finish drying in the sunlight. And where's it drying? It's drying close to T-force. And what is causing the microorganisms to come away? Well, it's the sun for one thing. because as it heats up, some of the microorganisms which went into stasis when the leaves were pan-fried wake up and they start going to work. So what determines which microorganism is going to be the head honcho, is going to be the lead in the change? It really is hard to answer that question in a way which would satisfy you. So the way I answer it is we don't know specifically year by year which organism is going to take that lead. What we do know is some organisms tend to jump out ahead if they're in sufficient numbers, and they dampen the development of other organisms. Some organisms allow multiple organisms to work at the same time, but that's way too complicated for us as tea drinkers to get into. I did want to paint that picture so you know what's happening, but that's not, from your perspective, what you're most interested in. All right, so let's go ahead, and rather than me continue to produce and provide explanations while you get thirstier and thirstier, let's have the tea master come and go ahead and demonstrate how to brew this tea, and then you'll brew along with her. So it is with great pleasure on this beautiful day here in Montclair for me to bring forward the numinous tea master, Sheng.
Thank you so much. I like it. I learned a lot of English. Okay, today we do rub like tea, huh? So yeah, okay. So rub like tea, so I use the the mug glasses, huh? It's my the YouTube, the YouTube. That just help me,
So her tableau is what you're used to seeing for a non-oolong tea. So it's 2 or 3 16-ounce glasses, a strainer, and of course the tea master loves to play. So we've got tea toys on the tea tray. And why we have so many glasses out is because we're going to go through a process of dissipating the steam. And so therefore, when you have 3 glasses, you can dissipate faster. So she's using 200-degree water to go ahead and make sure that the glasses are absolutely clean. We know that they're clean. Actually, what we're really making sure is that there's no soap residue or any other residue that's going to produce an unwelcome or an anomalous flavor. She's going to draw 175-degree water, and this is what we're going to dissipate, because remembering that the best of the raw blacks, just like the best of the whites and the best of the greens, like dissipated heat. And so she's going to dissipate this. It'll end up being somewhere between 170 degrees and 175. And that's what we're going to use. Remembering also that when you use higher temperatures, what do you do to the flavor? Flavor is inherently there. But if you use a higher temperature, you flatten it. And you don't allow it to be as bright as it can be. We have found through experimentation that within this range that we provide you get the brightest of the flavors. All right, so she's taking her bag of Ankh out. In that bag are 6 grams. And she's feeding the glass to make sure it's what she wants in terms of temperature. She puts the leaves in there and shakes them up. So why is she shaking them up? Is she just plain, is she young at heart as this tableau indicates, and she's just playing, and ergo, should you be playing? Well, if it were just playing, then you would have a choice. She's not playing. What she's trying to do is to heat the leaves uniformly and start them on this journey of producing a wonderful tea liquor. All right. So she set the timer for 2 minutes. I did that already. And this is a 2-minute steep. So let's go through quickly what raw blacks are. Raw blacks are from Yunnan, and they refer to something that in Chinese is called Sheng, which literally means raw is a good translation. In fact, it's a very good translation. Uncooked, really, uncooked poor. Poor, there's a lot of clumsiness with the English translations, which have led to a lot of interesting ways that you hear poor described. So you hear it described as fermented tea, as black tea, and of late, within the last 15 or 20 years, you hear it described as dark tea. Now, why would something that's already called black tea, it's already called fermented tea, why do we need another name, dark tea? This goes back to a 500-year mistake. And that is when the British and the Dutch translated red teas, which the Chinese have always called red tea, which are always the heavily oxidized teas. And they translated it as black. So that became black tea. But the Chinese have always said that the fermented teas are the black teas. And so that's where the confusion arose. All right, 2 minutes is done. You heard the timer. Tea master is going to separate the tea leaves from the tea liquor. Not in a hurry. Slowly, we're not trying to spill stuff all over the place. And look at this beautiful, beautiful color. Let's first look at the leaves. So, smell those leaves. Okay, what does smelling the leaves do? It sets up an expectation. Remembering smell and taste are related. This is why you're trying to set up an expectation. Is the expectation always fulfilled? And the answer is no. In fact, many times, the hints from the leaves aren't what you detect right away from the tea liquor. It's still important to get that, because also many times as you go deeper into the tea liquor, you start to detect what you initially detected. Now, to me, when I look at this, the first thing I notice is the clarity. This is really, really clear. And the second thing I notice is it's got a light green tinge, but there's a lot of yellowish, and it's not a light yellow, it's a deeper yellow. Why might that be important? For those of you who've been with us, remembering that raw black in the beginning will brew very much like a green tea, so it will be much closer to a greenish color than a yellow color. This indicates that what I told you earlier is probably true, that this is older and that it is fermenting and aging. Okay, let's go through the quality arena and see what's in there. Now I'm going to take a sip. This is a 170-degree sip. I'm going to roll it around my tongue. I'm going to look for what are the elements of drying, what are the elements of mouthfeel. After I get that, I'm going to swallow it and see what it feels like going down my throat and any aftertaste that I may feel. And then as we go down the road, I'm going to pay attention to energetics. What sort of feel and effect on my body is this? And you may not get that right away. It may take some time. So don't be nervous. If you feel, hey, I don't have any feeling, is there something wrong with me? The answer is there's nothing wrong with you. Feeling the energetics comes over time. Some people it's faster, some people it's slower, and some people it doesn't come at all. So let's enter the quality arena. There's some interesting things with this. I'm detecting a dryness. You'll tell me where you're detecting the dryness. Oh, I'm detecting a distinct aftertaste. I haven't gotten any energetics yet, except I do feel tea in me. So that's the first part of the energetics. I'm going to take a second. Okay, I've evaluated everything. I have a pretty good idea of what I think this tea is presenting me. So now it's your turn to brew. So the tea master is preparing everything. And while she's preparing, let me tell you the other thing which is important to understand about this particular tea. It's from Jing Mai Mountains. Jing Mai has a long cultural tradition that determines what the outcome of this tea is. And it's truly two ethnic groups. It's centrally two ethnic groups that control this process. It's the Bulong ethnic group and it's the Dai ethnic group. And they came from two different areas, origin areas, but they live together peacefully in this area, and they have developed culturally some fantastic and interesting rules about the growing of these tea trees and bushes and about the processing of them, as well as about the understanding of tea itself. Both of these groups take tea and the tea plant as central, almost in an animistic way. In other words, a spiritual way. That's how important tea is, or the tea plant is to them. All right. Of course, you're making sure that your glasses are completely clean. And of course, they're clean. We knew that. But that they have no soap spots or anything on them. And that's why you are using any degree temperature water between 212 and 175. And you're making sure that everything is spotless. You're taking your bag number 3, labeled Ankh. You're taking those 6 grams and pouring them into one of the already heated cups. You are then shaking. And you're dissipating the heat, because are you in a hurry? Well, of course you're in a hurry if you haven't had any tea this morning. Should you be in a hurry? Of course, the answer is no. You gotta make sure that you dissipate the heat and the steam. Now, of course, at home you can do anything you want. So this isn't a prescription of what you must do at home, but it's a recommendation of what you ought to do. And this is a 2-minute steep. So we're talking about raw black, we're talking about dark and black and all these naming conventions. Let's leave the naming conventions because you get the picture that it's confusing, but you also get the picture of what you need to listen for when people are talking about tea from Yunnan that's fermented. And those are some of the choices meaning the same thing. So here we call it raw black. If you say Sheng to us, we understand exactly what that is. If you say dark to us, we blink our eyes twice. Oh yeah, we know what that means. And we still understand what you mean. So quickly, the process is you pick the tea. In this area, normally they pick a bud and 2, sometimes 3 leaves. These are from old/ancient tree, and they're small trees that are about, they're about 24 feet high, anywhere from 12 to 24 feet high. They're in a grove type of configuration. And again, we'll talk about this because this will blow you away by the time I'm finished describing this whole situation, and it's a cultural situation. But let's get through the technical stuff first. You pick, you get it into the local production area, and then you sun dry, you wither, and from withering, you go to pan fry to turn off the enzyme of oxidation. You don't pan fry as hot as you would normally pan fry green tea. And there's reasons for that. So your timer has gone off. And remember, you're not in a wild hurry. You're using your tea rhythm to carefully separate the tea from the tea leaves. And you're seeing, or you should be seeing, this beautiful, beautiful color. And so the first thing you're going to do is smell the leaves. You're going to look at them first. And so as you look at these, you're going to notice some things, aren't you? So one of the things you're going to notice is, hey, maybe you should have called this rainbow tea. I get so many different colors in here. And, oh, smells. I get a lot of different smells. There's a lot going on. You didn't tell me this was going to be so many different smells. Wow. And I smell, oh, wait a minute. You're going to tell me what you smell in a minute. Then you're going to enter the quality arena. And the quality arena, remember, is taking that 170-degree sip, which you can coat your tongue with, roll it around in your mouth, and then start to make some determinations about mouthfeel. When you swallow it, how it goes down. Aftertaste, you're thinking also when it's in the mouth, density, thickness, thinness, all of these qualities, and then any sort of effect, any energetic effect on your body. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're not in a hurry. We're in tea rhythm. So while we're in tea rhythm, I'll talk and you slowly go through this process. So remember, they're frying at a lower temperature so that they don't kill the forest organisms. They make them go into stasis, but they don't kill them. They denature the enzymatic oxidation enzyme to a degree, but it's not completely denatured. Afterwards, they immediately roll the tea. And they roll the tea anyway, and it's usually a hand roll in the village, And they roll it anywhere from an hour to 90 minutes, something like that. If they're any good, they roll it much faster. If they're like me, they roll forever and you still don't get the right shape. But at any rate, they're all good. They're all excellent. They're all masters. So that's never an issue. After rolling, what do? They put it outside and let it sun dry. And so when you sun dry, again, you get those organisms, the microbial agents, to wake up and to start their work. And my goodness, they're off to the races as soon as they wake up. They respond much faster than the oxidation agents. The oxidation agents, again, they're going to respond over a much longer period of time. You really get them responding actively starting in year 5, 6, or 7. Does this mean that they stay completely dormant all the way up to 5, 6, and 7? Again, think of the tortoise and the hare. You know, that tortoise is so far in ahead that the hare, which is, that the tortoise, which has moved just a few steps, can't see it. But it's moving. The point is, it's moving. And, you know, the hare runs out of steam up there in year 7, and the tortoise just keeps moving and moving and moving and surpasses it at some point. And that then becomes a more dominant element in terms of the flavor formation as the tea ages.
One of the participants says, first, as a disclaimer, fermented teas are generally not her favorite, but the overwhelming aroma and taste she's getting from the tea is seaweed.
Oh, interesting. So this commentator talks about, first off, issues a disclaimer. Fermented teas are not her favorite. And that's good. We all have our favorites. And it's good to know what your favorite is and isn't. But then the commentator follows up and says there is a very distinct umami flavor. And she categorized it as seaweed.
Another participant says she's thinking the wet leaves have a slightly yeasty aroma after the slightly floral fruity aroma of the thunderous large dry leaves. But she's thinking that seaweed, or I guess as you said, umami is a better description.
You know, I truly, truly love this description. And you're going to understand why in a few minutes when I talk about how these are grown. So this commentator talks first off about the thunderously large leaves. They are thunderously large. And then gets into aroma flavor profile of slightly fruity, followed up by a slight yeastiness, and then followed by an umaminess. Love the totality of this description because without question, at some point, and remember when I was talking about all the different aromas in here, at some point, that fruitiness is an element that you cannot miss. Fruity / floral. By the way, remember here, when we do these things, fruity and floral are synonymous because many times we don't have a good word to differentiate the two, and we're not interested in that. What we're interested is in the trend. And if you say fruity and floral, I totally understand. Yes.
Another participant says the dry, warm leaves give her a sweet, grassy hay aroma. The wet leaves smell fresh and a bit malty. The tea liquor coats her tongue. There's some astringency. Overall impression is a delicate flavor.
Oh, great comment. So it starts out with dry leaves. And the dry leaves are
Sweet grassy hay aroma.
sweet, grassy hay aroma. And I love the fact, again, that there's a detection of the sweet in there. And of course, there is a detection that we're out in nature, the hay portion of it. Great comment. Then we get to the wet leaves, which have a maltiness and a freshness. And this is really a great comment because the commentator didn't leave the grounds and forget the freshness. There is a tremendous freshness to this. When I smell this, that sweet or fruit or floral and freshness dominate my thought pattern. And the commentator finishes up with an umami-ness in the flavor.
And also mentions, and I had actually dropped accidentally a piece of what she said, that the tea liquor coats her tongue and there's some astringents.
Ah, great. So tea liquor coats the tongue, some astringency. There clearly is astringency with this. However, if you ask me the following question, I'd have to answer it this way. If you ask me, has the astringency changed over time? Absolutely. When we first had this, by the way, the first time we had this was when it was about 3 years old. We didn't buy it at that time. The astringency was much, much stronger. Now, as part of the aging process, you're seeing that those microbial agents and the oxidation together are reducing the elements of that astringency. Yes.
Another says, the wet leaves had a scent of sweet vegetable malt. The tea liquor has a slight caramel and almost apple floral scent.
So the wet leaves, a sweet malt, the actual tea liquor, almost like an apple,
Light caramel,
caramel
scent.
floral scent. Love these descriptions because you're keeping close to sweet, floral, and a mix of umami, all of these elements playing in. So this isn't a single dimensional tea by any stretch of the imagination, and you're pulling that out. Yes.
What makes this tea different from another one of your raw blacks called Reverence?
So what makes this one different than Reverence? So Reverence, first off, is younger than Ankh. So that is to say it has less years of aging. And therefore, you're going to find a little bit more astringency in Reverence. And that's natural because it's aged less. Generally speaking, in terms of the other elements, we find Reverence and Ankh to share fruit and floral, but we would say Ankh is sweeter than Reverence. That's how we would approach this. And one of the reasons we went ahead and picked up Ankh was the development of that maltiness and the sweetness, because we found that so interesting for a raw black, because many times with raw blacks, especially the ones we've had here, you get more of that. The umami plays more of a flavor role, sweetness plays less. This is an exception.
Another commenter says, I feel like there are two layers of flavor. One that I detect on the periphery of my tongue that reminds me of lotus leaves. He had lotus leaf rice yesterday. And then there is a layer in the center of his tongue which is smoother.
So this commentator has two elements. One, there's on the sides of the tongue for which the commentator feels that there's a taste of lotus. And the implied meaning, especially compared to what the commentator feels in the center of the tongue, is that there's more astringency on the side and it's much smoother in the center. So instead of enshrining that comment as a fact, let's talk about what it really represents. And it represents an individual perception of this particular tea. So all of us are going to feel slightly different. And some of you will feel exactly as this commentator, oh yeah, there's astringency on the sides and smoothness in the center. And others of you will say to me, wait a minute, for me, there's more astringency in the center and there's a little bit less on the sides, or there's none on the sides. So what does this tell you about us humans? We're genomically different. And the construction and the placement of taste buds is different in our mouths. So while as an aggregate, we should get an average that is about within a range, individually, we're going to have some wide differences in how we perceive some of these minute elements. Yes.
The tea seems to taste sweeter as I get further into the tea.
Tea for this commentator is sweeter further into the tea. So I will tell you this. When I smelt the leaves in the beginning, that sweetness was predominant for me. However, when I tasted it, I didn't pick up as much of that in the beginning. However, now though, as I taste it, I also get an increased sweetness. So there's lots of reasons that this can happen. Not only is the chemical constituency of the cup changing as it cools, but also as anything cools, how you detect it in your mouth ends up being different. So lots of elements going on here. We're all on the same page. We're well within the guardrails.
Another taster says she's also getting the apple flavor somebody else had previously mentioned as it cools. And someone else asked to reference that other raw black that was mentioned. Is the processing similar to Ankh?
Okay. So we have a similarity in terms of the apple flavor that was mentioned before. So for me, when I hear that, I hear several different things. Apple for me, especially when I hear it applied to tea, is not only about the sweetness. In another way, it's about crispness. Now, I'm not indicating that there's a crispness in the tea, but what I am indicating is as an aftertaste, there is that crispness. Cooling is how I normally call it, but I get it when you talk about an appleness to it. Absolutely no problem with that. Then the next comment is about a further difference between reverence and Ankh.
Is there processing? Are they processed in a
process.
similar fashion, or is it different?
So the process is absolutely in a similar fashion. However, very importantly, there is one main difference, and it's not the same village that is processing. Remember, if I didn't say before, what I meant to say is on this mountain, in this area of ancient trees, there are 9 different villages. So every village, while characteristically in the big picture, is exactly the same. At the detail level, obviously, there are going to be small differences in how they roll, length of time to process. So all the discrete steps exactly the same. The tradition is exactly the same. The spiritual underpinnings are the same. But again, because of the experience passed through the generations of the elders, the actual details can be different, are different, and will reflect in a change or a difference in flavor. All right, so let's continue talking about the process if I haven't run myself out of time. I haven't. And talk a little bit more about this cultural tradition, because this cultural tradition is fascinating. So basically, I did finish up the process. You get to the end. You have a choice after you've sun-dried. You can either compress it into cakes, and that's it, or this end is frequently called unfinished tea, or 70% tea, as I like to call it. And big producers will come in and use this for blends for fully fermented teas. Or what will happen is people like us will come along and get the loose leaf of this. And there's less of the loose leaf available because that's a harder way to store it. But that's the way we like to bring it in, so that you have, it's easier to sell to you in some ways. But more importantly, it's easier to see, and you see more quickly the process of flavor change and aroma change in the raw blacks as it happens. All right, so you have a grasp of the basic process of how to do raw black. Now, I've kept harping on cultural significance of how the Bulong tribal group and the Dai tribal group interact with tea. So now let's reflect on the very short movie I sent last night. You saw basically a big totem tree, and that is a totem tree. And what I mean by that, that's the symbolic tree at the entrance of the Jingmai Mountains. And that thing has about 50 beehives on it. And it's one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen. And you're seeing it in that movie clip. That comes from the very first time we saw that tree. There was somebody else down there, the village person, after this very long trip trying to find where this village was, then, walking us up via cell phone, or how to get up this mountain, go left, don't go right, all of that stuff. And then, we're driving deeper and deeper into what looks like nothing but forest. And all of a sudden the driver stops and says, I think we're here. And a few minutes later, the head of the village comes up a small trail and says, I didn't want you to go into where you're going to stay first. I want you to see what's most important to us. And we walked down this trail and saw this magnificent, just surprising tree. It's not a tea tree, but it is the symbolic entrance to the old forest. And they treat this tree as if this is one of the most important symbols of their relationship with nature. And now I'm talking in a way which may seem somewhat mystical to you, but what I'm trying to convey to you is this is how they interact with the plants. In a way, to give you an analogy, the way they treat old and ancient tea trees, the way they treat the overall ancient forest, is much the way that indigenous peoples here in America interact with the land. It's what I imagine that the Miwok did when they lived up in Yosemite. I imagine that they interacted very carefully with the trees and the surrounding land for the eons of years that they lived there. Certainly these people have that type of relationship with the land. So concretely, what does this mean? So let's talk about units first, cultural units. So pre-1949, the cultural unit was you had spiritual leaders who led each village. Post-1949, the communists came in and said, we're not going to disturb the structure of having spiritual leaders be very important voices in the village. We are going to have a political arm which will also help the village develop. So you had two arms helping the village develop. Was the political arm heavier than the spiritual arm? Certainly you wouldn't have said that. What you would have said, and you'd have been correct, is that the spiritual arm, because they understood this forest and the way they've been interacting with it for generation after generation after generation, they were given wide berth to continue to make what they thought were the right decisions in developing these areas. So what technique did they use to develop these areas? And when did they start doing it? The when is more problematic than the technique itself. The when is sometime between 800 AD to about 1000 AD. So sometime both the Bulong group and the Dai group came to this area. And, why are things so imprecise? Because, the written record is a little sketchy, and the farther you go back, some of the written records have been lost. And so estimates need to be made. But what isn't sketchy at all is the technique that they used. So they would go to the center of ancient forests and cut down a few of the trees within the center of the forest. Now, why did they do that? Were they cold? Did they need wood? No. That would be too simple and a silly answer. Instead, this was the start of their cultivation of tea within this forest. So they would cut down these trees and then plant from seed tea plants. And then they carefully raised these tea plants or saw over these tea plants. And obviously they did this for some period of time because they allowed them to grow into small trees. And from small trees, they developed into bigger trees. And as they developed, and they are widely spaced, and you can still tell this today when you go to where the tea trees are, widely spaced, not close at all. I mean, you can see where the other one is, but you must have 30 or 40 feet between each of the trees. So what did they do, and why did they do it that way? Well, they had really a good plan. They planted some bushes, tea bushes, and other types of bushes between the trees. And then on the land itself, that is next to the ground, what did they do there? They planted herbs. So they had this really integrated, diverse set of plants growing. Now, why did they do that? Did they just like lots of pretty flowers and variety? Well, I'm sure they like that. But really, what other function did it do? It helped retain the correct moisture on the land. It helped control pests. And I will tell you, when we were up there, it was hilarious. I didn't send you the picture because I didn't want to clog up your emails. But there's a picture of me because the headman sticks this herb in my nose, in both nostrils. And this herb, I don't even know what it was, but it's a local herb. He said, don't worry, when you have this in your nose, the mosquitoes, and by the way, the mosquitoes are noisy and enormous up there. And he said, this repels them. And so you don't have to worry about that. So I'm walking around, actually, both Tea Master and I are walking, and he is too, walking around with these big old, well, with these herbs, you know, from our nostrils. Hilarious picture. And we did that for quite a long time. And what I'm trying to, through this example, point out is they have a relationship with the land, and every plant means something. So the headman took us out into the forest and is picking this plant. Oh, this thing does this thing does that. And it was just astounding, their knowledge of every single plant, including the parasitic plants that live on the tea trees themselves. And those parasitic plants that live on the tea trees in this area are the most highly prized as herbal medicines. And those things go for an enormous amount of money. Those things are $1,000 a pound. And they're really delicate, and you have to really know how to look in the tea trees. Oh, there's one of those things hanging down. After you start to spot them, you get the hang of it. But it's truly amazing, their relationship, the groups, and both the groups, both the Bulong and the Dai group, their relationship with the land. So is there something special about the land itself? In other words, is the soil volcanic? No, it is red soil primarily, and it has the perfect pH for tea plants, which is about 4.5 pH, 4.5 to 5. And so both of those elements mean that the tea plants grow in abundance, and given how they plant everything else around it, and then they slowly move that through the forest, they have tremendous output. So what happens when smart people come to the area? And these are smart scientists. We love scientists, right? I love scientists. They come to the area and they say, oh, this is kind of, you could get more out of this land. And so the elders resisted. And so in the area where the traditional tribes live, they resisted, they didn't change. And then areas that are that abut up to this area, they planted using modern techniques, clonal techniques. So you got rows of stuff. Oh, just beautiful. And the yield was, oh, good yield. It was great. Except for those that were planted like that became susceptible to pests. And sadly, not only were they susceptible to pests, but the ones that were planted in the forest next to them also had issues. And so they soon found out, as they analyzed the situation, oh, wait a minute, these people who've had this relationship with the land for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, many, many generations, have figured out the right way to utilize the land. And so actually in the 2000s, the scientists came through again and said, we were wrong, we were right, and started to push away those cultivated fields further and further away from the forest, because the forest, no fertilizer, no pesticides. I mean, clean tea.
How much are the parasitic plants you referenced a part of the natural terroir?
So this question has two implications. So I'm going to try and answer both. So I believe the question is the question as stated is how much are the parasitic plants part of the natural terroir? That's how it's stated. And the way I interpret the question is, are the parasitic plants native to this terroir? And the answer to that question would be yes. If the questioner is asking, are these parasitic plants brought in from other areas, or could you take these to other areas? We do not perceive that as being the case.
Question about the type of tree, and Jane, I want to ask because it was a question from a little bit back. Do you mean, Jane, the trees from which these leaves are gathered? While you're unmuting yourself or writing me back, aha, you are fast. The totem tree is the question. What kind of tree?
Yeah, I knew somebody was going to ask me this morning. And the truth of the matter is I'll have to get back to you. I think it's a magnolia tree. That's what I think. But you know what? I want to verify that because I remember being surprised before because I actually have that information somewhere. I have the precise information somewhere. I couldn't dig it up just before the broadcast this morning because I was thinking about that myself. It is not a tea tree. It is, but I believe it is a varietal of magnolia. Yes.
The previous questions about, there's clarifications about whether or how the local parasites influence the tea flavor.
Oh, not parasitic plants. The actual parasites that are the microbial agents, I believe is what's being asked. Is that what, if that's what's being asked, okay, let me back up. Let me answer both questions. Do the parasitic plants influence the tea flavor? The answer is yes. How would they influence the tea flavor? We're unclear. Are the parasitic organisms that live in the forest, do they influence when you're doing the process, the tea flavor? They absolutely do. And is there a direct, can I say that such and such an organism will create sweetness or such and such an organism will create some other flavor? The answer is no. They're working on this, by the way. They are working on these issues, but they are not at a point where they can say with absolute clarity, A equals B.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good. Oh, and we really are good because we've gotten over time. So we really wanted to have this raw black. Last week we did an unusual fully fermented, and you saw a certain flavor profile with that. This one, because we wanted to knit together the cultural concepts of Jing Mai and how that relates to the tea. That's why we picked that this week. So you guys did just terrific in terms of identifying flavor profiles, aroma, energetics, all of that stuff. Great, great job. We're finished with this set of 3. Next week, we start with a new set of 3. And the first one's going to be a nice, unusual white tea called New Paths. So your assignment, should you accept it, is to stay in good health this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.